My girlfriend's ultimate betrayal. How I found out she was cheating with 4 guys. I never thought I'd be the guy posting something like this. You know the type, the ones you scroll past at 1 a.m. thinking, damn, glad that's not me. Well, here I am. Pull up a chair. 3 years. That's how long Sarah and I were together. 3 years of inside jokes, Sunday morning pancakes, and me genuinely, embarrassingly believing she was the one. I had a ring picked out. Not bought yet, but picked out, saved in a browser tab I'd visit sometimes just to remind myself what I was working toward. A cushion-cut diamond on a simple gold band, because she'd once pointed at something similar in a jewelry store window and said, "That's all I'd ever want." I remembered everything. That was kind of my thing. I was working double shifts at the time, picking up extra hours wherever I could. We had this plan, see? Save enough for the ring, then the deposit on a bigger place, then maybe a wedding sometime before we hit 30. Boring, predictable, beautiful stuff. The kind of future that doesn't make for a great story, which is probably why I'm not telling that one. It started with her phone, not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way. It was subtle at first, the way these things always are when you look back on them. She'd started flipping it face down whenever she set it on the coffee table. She'd leave the room to answer calls she used to take right next to me without a second thought. Small things. The kind you notice but immediately talk yourself out of because the alternative explanation is one you're not ready to sit with. Then the 2 a.m. notifications started. The first time it happened, I was half asleep, and her phone buzzing on the nightstand just kind of bled into whatever dream I was having. The second time, I woke up fully, watched her grab it, squint at the screen, then roll away from me and type something with her phone angled away from my face. I asked her about it the next morning, casual as I could manage. "Work stuff," she said, not looking up from her coffee. "You know how it gets." I did know how it got. She worked in events coordination. Genuinely hectic job, genuinely odd hours sometimes. I filed it away and moved on, because that's what you do when you trust someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You choose the boring explanation over the terrifying one, because love is partly an act of choosing to believe the best about a person every single day. The notifications kept coming, every night, like clockwork, somewhere between 1 and 3 a.m. Some nights she'd slip out of bed, and I'd hear her murmuring in the hallway. Work stuff had apparently become a full-time, nocturnal operation. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't building a case in my head. I wasn't trying to. It just started accumulating. The way she'd started dressing differently on certain evenings. The new perfume she'd bought, without mentioning it. The way she laughed a little too quickly when I brought up her gay friend, Marcus, who she'd been spending increasingly more time with. The lunch meetings with her boss that ran long. The evenings where she came home with an energy I couldn't quite place. Not happy exactly, more like satisfied. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself I was the problem. I even booked us a weekend away, thinking maybe we'd just drifted and needed to reconnect. She cancelled 2 days before because of, and yes, I'm serious, work stuff. I went through her phone on a Tuesday. I'm not going to dress it up or pretend I feel great about it. I know all the arguments: invasion of privacy, trust, communication. I'd made those same arguments to friends going through similar situations and told them not to do it. But something had shifted in me by then. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was a quieter, colder feeling. The feeling of a person who already knows the answer and is just waiting to have it confirmed. She was in the shower. Her phone was on the bed. I picked it up. It wasn't locked. She'd told me her passcode years ago and never changed it, which, looking back, is its own kind of arrogance. I opened her messages expecting to find maybe one conversation, one guy, something I could process, however badly it would hurt, something with a shape I could understand. What I found instead was 4 separate threads, each with its own landscape of betrayal. I'm going to be honest. The first few seconds I just stared at the screen like my brain had simply refused to load the information. 4 distinct contact names, 4 sets of conversations stretching back months, photos, plans, inside jokes, and the kind of language that made it impossible to misinterpret what I was looking at. I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs stopped working. The first name I recognized immediately. Danny. My best friend since we were 11 years old, the guy who'd been my wingman, my groomsman in waiting, the person I'd called the night my dad went to the hospital. Their thread went back almost 8 months, 8 months of conversations that I can't fully describe here, but I'll tell you this, they talked about me. A lot. And not kindly. There was a message from Danny, my Danny, saying I was too dumb to notice anyway. Sarah had responded with a laughing emoji. The second was her boss, Richard. Middle-aged, married, exactly the cliché you're already picturing. Their dynamic read differently from the others, more calculated on his end, more transactional. He'd apparently been promising her things, career things. She seemed to believe him, or at least find it useful to act like she did. The third was our neighbor, a guy named Kyle who lived 3 doors down the hall and who I'd had beers with on the building's rooftop more than once. Friendly, easygoing Kyle, who I'd actually defended once when a mutual friend called him sketchy. Their messages were more casual, more spontaneous. The kind of thing that apparently happened when I was on a night shift and he was just down the hallway. And then there was Marcus, the gay friend. The one she'd always brought up with this particular emphasis, like his sexuality was a kind of proof she offered before I could even ask the question. Marcus was not, it turned out, gay. Or if he was, that hadn't been the determining factor in his relationship with my girlfriend. Their thread was the longest. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the shower to stop, for the hairdryer to start, for the whole mundane soundtrack of her morning routine to play out, while I held her phone with both hands like it was something that might shatter. By the time she came out of the bathroom in her towel, I'd read enough. People always describe confrontations like these as explosive. Screaming, crying, doors slamming. Maybe that's how it goes for some people. For me, it was almost eerily quiet. She walked in, clocked me sitting on the bed, saw her phone in my hands, and something shifted in her face. Not guilt exactly. More like a recalibration, like a person switching gears. "How long?" I said. She didn't ask what I was referring to, didn't try to grab the phone or deflect. She just looked at me with this expression I'd never seen on her before, something flat and unimpressed, and she said, "About 8 months." I waited for something else. Tears, maybe. An explanation that might somehow make a fragment of sense. Even anger would have been something to hold on to. Instead, she kind of laughed. Not a cruel laugh, which almost would have been easier. Just this short, tired sound, like I'd finally caught up on a joke everyone else had heard months ago. "Took you long enough," she said. "I thought you'd figure it out ages ago." I asked her what that meant. She sat down at the vanity and started doing her makeup. Actually started doing her makeup and told me I was too predictable, that she'd gotten bored, that it wasn't malicious, just something that happened when you stopped being curious about your own life. I remember thinking, she's rehearsed this. Maybe not the specific words, but the energy of it. the calm. She'd imagined this conversation before, probably decided how she'd handle it, and landed on unbothered. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I said something like, I was saving for a ring. And she looked at me in the mirror and said, I know, that's kind of what I mean. I left the room, started putting my things in bags. She got dressed, told me she was going out to clear her head, and left the apartment while I was still packing. I was done and gone before she came back. That same night, around midnight, my phone lit up with a text from Danny. Hey man, look, it wasn't personal. These things happen. Hope you're doing okay. These things happen. I've thought about that sentence a lot in the months since. The extraordinary effort it takes to look at an 8-month betrayal with your best friend since childhood and land on these things happen as your chosen explanation. Like it was weather, like it was traffic, like it was just one of those unfortunate features of being alive, rather than a series of choices both of you made repeatedly over the course of almost a year. I didn't respond. I blocked him, blocked her, blocked Kyle, blocked Marcus, deleted Richard's number from the one time Sarah had made me save it for some logistical reason I can't even remember now. Then I stared at the ceiling of my car in the parking garage of my building and tried to figure out what to do next. I moved to a different city 2 weeks later. I had a cousin there who offered me a couch while I sorted myself out. I took it. I needed to be somewhere that didn't have a 3-year layer of memories over every surface. The coffee shop where we had our first date, the park we walked through every fall, the hallway outside our building where I now had to walk past Kyle's door. The first month was rough in a way that's hard to fully articulate. It wasn't just the betrayal, though, that was plenty. It was the restructuring, having to go back through years of memories and see them differently now. The weekends she'd been visiting her sister. The evenings I'd worked late, happy, because I was building towards something. The way she'd sometimes seemed distracted or distant, and I'd assumed it was stress, assumed it was my fault even, and tried to show up more for her. All those moments had a different explanation now, and my brain kept insisting on going through them one by one, updating the files. I started therapy about 3 weeks in. I want to be straightforward about that because I think there's still this weird reluctance, especially among guys, to admit when you need that kind of help. I needed it. Not because I was falling apart, though some days it felt close, but because I had this compulsive need to understand the logic of what had happened, to find the part where it made sense. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had clearly heard everything, kept gently steering me away from that project. You're looking for a reason that would make it hurt less, she told me. There isn't one. Some things just hurt the amount they hurt. I've thought about that a lot too. 2 months later, I was doing genuinely okay. Not great, but okay. I'd found a sublet, started settling into the new city, was sleeping through the night again most of the time. I'd even reached out to a couple of old friends I'd let drift, the ones who'd never really warmed to Sarah. Now that I thought about it, I was cautiously starting to rebuild something. Then my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did, just for the sheer narrative completeness of it. It was Sarah, and she was crying. Genuinely crying, the kind that's hard to fake, with the unsteady breathing and the voice that keeps breaking. I hadn't heard her cry in years, maybe ever. It had an impact I wasn't entirely prepared for, which tells you something about how deep the grooves of a long relationship run, even after everything. I let her talk. The picture that emerged between the tears and the fragments was almost poetic in its tidiness. Richard, the boss, had ended things after getting what he wanted and, when she'd pushed back, had engineered a reason to let her go. She'd been fired about a month after I left. Kyle had moved away shortly after. Apparently the situation with me had made things awkward enough that he'd decided to relocate, which, fine. Danny had been caught by his own girlfriend who'd found the messages, and that relationship had imploded loudly enough that their entire shared social circle now knew what he'd done. And Marcus had simply stopped responding once the novelty had worn off. No confrontation, no explanation, just a gradually lengthening silence until it became undeniable. All four of them, gone, in different ways for different reasons, but gone. She said she'd been thinking a lot, that she'd made a catastrophic mistake, that she'd been selfish and immature and hadn't understood what she had. She said she missed me. She asked, with this tentative, underwater hope in her voice, whether there was any chance we could talk about working things out. I waited until she finished. Then I laughed. Not to be cruel, or maybe a little to be cruel, I won't pretend otherwise, but mostly because it was genuinely the only response that felt true to the moment. The symmetry of it was almost too much. She'd laughed when I found out. I laughed when she called back. Some things you can't fix, I told her. She started to say something else and I ended the call, blocked the number. Here's the thing about betrayal at that scale. It doesn't just hurt you, it disorients you. For a while afterward, I genuinely questioned my own perception of reality. How do you miss something that large? How do you spend 3 years building a life with someone and fail to notice they're living an entirely separate one alongside it? Those questions can eat you alive if you let them. My therapist had a useful reframe for that too. She pointed out that what I'd actually demonstrated wasn't blindness, it was trust. I'd trusted Sarah because I'd had no compelling reason not to. The signs that seem obvious in retrospect only read as signs because I now know the ending. At the time, they were just small inconsistencies that a reasonable person in a committed relationship explains away. Because that's what reasonable people in committed relationships do. I wasn't naive. I was just a person who believed in the version of reality he'd been given, because his partner had chosen every single day for 8 months to maintain that fiction. That's on her, not me. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to really believe that. I'm writing this about 4 months out from the night I found her phone. I'm in a city I'm starting to genuinely like. I'm back to sleeping normally, eating normally, doing all the basic human maintenance tasks that go out the window when your life detonates. I'm still in therapy, still working through the layers of it, though the sessions have shifted from crisis management to something more like maintenance. I'm not dating anyone, not even close to ready for that. But I've stopped assuming that what happened with Sarah is some kind of verdict on me, on my capacity to be loved, or to choose correctly, or to build something real with someone. It was a verdict on her choices, and on Danny's, and on all the rest of them. That's where it belongs. The ring tab is closed. I never did buy it. Maybe someday I'll open a new one. Not yet, but maybe someday.